Welcome, sailor. This is the story of a naval electronics specialist who thought he understood every system aboard a nuclear submarine, until a catastrophic power failure left him trapped alone in the navigation compartment, 300 feet beneath the North Pacific, with the hull groaning under pressure it was never meant to withstand. What began as a routine deep-sea trial became a race against time, physics, and the crushing weight of the ocean itself.
My name is David Chin, and I've been a Navy electronics technician for 8 years. I've served aboard 3 different submarines, from the cramped confines of a Los Angeles-class attack sub to the massive missile compartments of Ohio-class boomers. But nothing in my training prepared me for what happened aboard the USS Hammerhead during sea trials off the coast of Washington State. The Hammerhead was the Navy's newest Virginia-class attack submarine, fresh from the shipyard and undergoing final systems testing before full operational deployment. At 377 feet long and displacing 7,800 tons submerged, she represented the cutting edge of American submarine technology, nuclear-powered, virtually silent, and packed with electronic systems that I'd spent years learning to maintain and repair. On October 15th, we were conducting deep diving trials in the Cascadia Basin, a section of the Pacific Ocean floor that drops to over 9,000 feet depth. These trials were designed to test the submarine's systems under maximum operational stress, pushing every component to its design limits before the vessel was cleared for combat missions. I was the senior electronics technician responsible for the navigation and communications suite, a room-sized compartment packed with computer servers, radar systems, GPS equipment, and the sophisticated sonar arrays that serve as a submarine's primary sense organs in the underwater world. My job was to monitor these systems during the deep dive and report any anomalies to the control room. But at 1,347 hours, as we descended past 280 feet, every electronic system aboard the Hammerhead failed simultaneously. First contact with the deep. The morning of October 15th started with the kind of gray, drizzling weather that defines the Pacific Northwest in autumn. The USS Hammerhead had departed Naval Base Kitsap at 0600 hours, her sleek black hull cutting through the choppy waters of Puget Sound as we headed west toward the deep water testing area. Captain Sarah Rodriguez was one of the Navy's most experienced submarine commanders, with over 15 years of underwater operations including 2 combat deployments in the Persian Gulf. She'd been handpicked to oversee the Hammerhead's final trials because of her reputation for meticulous attention to detail and her ability to identify potential problems before they became critical failures. "Chen, I want you monitoring every electronic signature during today's deep dive," she told me during the morning briefing. "This boat's got more computer power than the space shuttle, and all of it needs to work perfectly when we're operating at crush depth." The crew complement for the sea trials was minimal, just 38 personnel compared to the Hammerhead's full operational crew of 135. We had the essential ratings needed to operate the submarine safely: nuclear reactor technicians, sonar operators, navigation specialists, and damage control personnel. But the reduced crew meant that each person aboard had expanded responsibilities and no backup if something went wrong. My station in the navigation compartment was located amidships, between the control room and the nuclear reactor compartment. It was a cramped space about the size of a large walk-in closet, packed floor to ceiling with electronic equipment that hummed and beeped with constant activity. Multiple computer screens displayed real-time data about our position, course, speed, and depth, while banks of servers processed the enormous amounts of information required to navigate safely underwater. The dive itself began normally at 0800 hours, with the Hammerhead submerging smoothly from periscope depth to 100 feet, then 200 feet, then deeper as we headed toward the continental shelf. The Pacific Ocean off Washington State reaches depths of over 14,000 feet in some areas, providing an ideal testing ground for deep diving operations. "Navigation, this is control. Report all systems status," came the voice of Lieutenant Commander Martinez, the officer of the deck. "Control, navigation. All electronic systems operating normally. GPS lock maintained, inertial navigation system synchronized, sonar array functioning within normal parameters." At 250 feet depth, we were well below the thermocline, the layer of water where temperature changes dramatically and sound behaves differently. This is where submarines become truly invisible to surface detection, but it's also where the ocean begins to exert serious pressure on the hull structure. The Hammerhead's hull was designed to withstand pressures up to 800 feet depth, with safety margins built in for emergency situations. But submarine hulls are essentially pressure vessels operating in reverse. Instead of containing high pressure, they're resisting the enormous external pressure of the ocean trying to crush them. Passing 280 feet, all systems nominal, I reported through the intercom system. That's when I heard the first sound that shouldn't have been there, a low rhythmic vibration transmitted through the submarine's hull structure. It wasn't the normal operational noise of the nuclear reactor or the submarine's machinery. This was something different, something that seemed to come from outside the hull. Control navigation. I'm picking up an unusual acoustic signature, bearing unknown. It's not biologics and it doesn't match any known surface vessels. Commander Martinez's response was immediate. Navigation, can you classify the contact? I studied the sonar displays trying to interpret the strange signal patterns. In 8 years of submarine operations, I'd learned to identify everything from whale songs to the distinctive acoustic signatures of foreign naval vessels. But this contact was unlike anything in our database. Control, the acoustic signature appears to be geological in nature. Possible seismic activity on the ocean floor. That assessment would prove to be catastrophically wrong. Very well, navigation. Continue monitoring and report any changes. At exactly 1,347 hours, as the hammerhead reached 300 feet depth, every electronic system in the navigation compartment died simultaneously. Not a gradual failure, not a system-by-system shutdown, but an instantaneous loss of all electrical power that plunged the compartment into complete darkness. The constant hum of cooling fans, the soft beeping of navigation computers, the gentle whir of hard drives, all of it stopped at once, leaving me in absolute silence. Control navigation. I called through the sound-powered phone system, the mechanical communication backup that doesn't require electrical power. I have total electrical failure in the navigation compartment. No response. I tried the intercom system, the general alarm, even the emergency communication circuits. Nothing. The navigation compartment had become electrically isolated from the rest of the submarine, and I had no way to communicate with the control room or determine the status of other systems. Emergency lighting should have activated automatically when primary power failed, but even the battery-powered backup systems were dead. I fumbled for the manual flashlight that every submarine compartment was required to maintain, and its beam revealed the full scope of what had happened. Every computer screen was black. Every status light was dark. Every electronic system that made modern submarine navigation possible had simply stopped working, as if someone had thrown a master switch and cut power to the entire compartment. But the most terrifying realization came when I tried to open the compartment's access hatch to reach the control room. The electrically operated hatch mechanism was completely dead, and the manual backup handle wouldn't turn no matter how much force I applied. I was trapped alone in a powerless compartment aboard a submarine that was 300 feet underwater and possibly suffering from total electrical failure. The hull was beginning to make sounds I'd never heard before, deep groaning noises that suggested the submarine structure was under stress beyond its normal operating parameters. Through the hull, I could still hear that rhythmic vibration I detected on sonar, but now it seemed closer and more intense. In submarine operations, there's a saying, there are two types of vessels that operate underwater: submarines and targets. The implication is that submarines are incredibly complex machines where any single failure can cascade into catastrophic consequences. Now I was experiencing that reality firsthand. The hammerhead was designed with multiple redundant systems to prevent exactly this kind of total electrical failure. Nuclear submarines have backup power systems, emergency batteries, and manual controls that should allow basic operations even if the main electrical grid fails. But something had happened that was beyond the scope of normal emergency procedures. I began a systematic check of every manual control and backup system in the navigation compartment, working by flashlight to assess what equipment might still be functional. The compartment contained emergency air supplies, manual communication equipment, and backup navigation instruments that didn't depend on electrical power. But as I worked, the hull continued to emit those disturbing groaning sounds, and I realized that whatever had caused our electrical failure might also be affecting the submarine's depth control and ballast systems. If the hammerhead couldn't maintain neutral buoyancy or control her depth, we could continue sinking toward the ocean floor, and at 9,000 feet depth, the water pressure would crush the hull like an aluminum can. The rhythmic vibration I detected was getting stronger, and now I could feel it through the submarine's deck plates. It felt almost like construction equipment, heavy machinery operating somewhere near the submarine. But that was impossible. We were 300 feet underwater, miles from shore, in an area where no surface vessels or underwater operations were scheduled, unless something was down there that wasn't supposed to be. The systems cascade, working by flashlight in the darkened navigation compartment, I began to understand the true scope of what had happened to the Hammerhead. This wasn't just a simple electrical failure, it was a complete systems cascade that had affected every piece of electronic equipment simultaneously. I'd witnessed electrical failures before during my 8 years of submarine service. Power surges, circuit breaker trips, even damage from seawater intrusion. All of these could knock out individual systems or sections of the submarine's electrical grid. But what had happened to us was different. Every computer, every display, every electronic component had failed at exactly the same moment, suggesting an external cause rather than an internal malfunction. The manual emergency procedures for total electrical failure required immediate communication with the control room to coordinate emergency surfacing operations. But the sound-powered phone system that should have connected me to other compartments was completely dead, and the compartment's access hatch remained locked in the closed position despite my repeated attempts to operate the manual backup mechanism. Using my flashlight, I located the compartment's emergency equipment locker and retrieved the portable radiation detector that every submarine carries as standard safety equipment. Nuclear submarines operate with incredibly sophisticated shielding to protect the crew from reactor radiation, but certain types of electromagnetic events can disrupt both electronic systems and nuclear shielding simultaneously. The radiation detector's analog gauge showed normal background levels, ruling out reactor problems as the cause of our electrical failure. But the electromagnetic pulse detector, a specialized instrument carried aboard military submarines to detect nuclear weapons effects, showed readings that were off the scale. An electromagnetic pulse, or EMP, can be caused by nuclear weapons detonation, solar flares, or certain types of experimental weapons systems. The effect is to induce massive electrical currents in any conductive material, instantly destroying semiconductor electronics while leaving mechanical systems unaffected. But we weren't in a war zone, and solar flare activity would have been predicted days in advance by naval weather services. The EMP readings suggested that something had generated an enormous electromagnetic field in close proximity to the Hammerhead, something powerful enough to penetrate the submarine's electromagnetic shielding and destroy every electronic system aboard. The sound I'd been hearing through the hull was becoming more distinct, and I realized it wasn't just rhythmic vibration, it was machinery noise. Specifically, it sounded like the acoustic signature of large electric motors and hydraulic systems operating underwater. Submarines are designed to be virtually silent when running submerged, using advanced sound dampening technology to avoid detection by enemy sonar. The fact that I could clearly hear mechanical noise through the Hammerhead's hull meant that whatever was generating those sounds was either very close or very large. I tried the emergency communication equipment again, including the underwater telephone system that allows submarines to communicate with surface vessels using acoustic signals. But even the backup communication systems were dead, confirming that the electromagnetic pulse had affected every electronic component aboard the submarine. The hull groaning was becoming more frequent and more intense, suggesting that the Hammerhead was either sinking beyond her design depth or being subjected to external pressures that exceeded normal operating parameters. Without access to depth gauges or ballast control systems, I had no way to determine our current depth or rate of descent. Submarine hulls are engineered to withstand enormous external pressure, but they have absolute limits beyond which catastrophic implosion becomes inevitable. The Hammerhead's maximum operating depth was classified, but Virginia-class submarines are generally rated for operations down to 800 feet. Beyond that depth, the hull structure begins to deform under pressure, and critical systems can fail even before the hull itself ruptures. I began searching the navigation compartment for any equipment that might still be functional. Manual navigation instruments, mechanical depth gauges, analog communication devices, anything that didn't depend on semiconductor electronics and might have survived the electromagnetic pulse. In a sealed cabinet marked Emergency Navigation Equipment, I found what submariners call a dead reckoning tracker, a mechanical navigation system that uses gyroscopes and accelerometers to track the submarine's position without requiring electronic computers or GPS signals. This World War II-era technology had been maintained aboard modern submarines as a backup system for exactly this type of electronic failure. The dead reckoning tracker showed that the Hammerhead had been descending steadily since the electrical failure, and we were now at approximately 450 feet depth, still within the submarine's safe operating envelope, but approaching the limits where hull stress becomes critical. More importantly, the tracker indicated that we weren't just sinking, we were being drawn horizontally through the water at a speed of nearly 3 knots. Something was pulling the Hammerhead through the ocean, and that something was powerful enough to overcome the submarine's considerable mass and drag. The mechanical noise through the hull was now accompanied by what sounded like metal-on-metal contact, scraping, grinding sounds that suggested the submarine's hull was in physical contact with some kind of external structure. But there should have been nothing at this depth except open ocean water. I tried to piece together what might be happening based on the limited information available. An electromagnetic pulse powerful enough to destroy every electronic system aboard a nuclear submarine would require either experimental military technology or an industrial accident involving enormous amounts of electrical energy. The mechanical sounds suggested large underwater equipment operating in close proximity to our position. The conclusion I reached was almost too incredible to believe. The Hammerhead had encountered some kind of underwater installation that was using electromagnetic weapons or industrial equipment powerful enough to disable our electronics and physically manipulate our submarine. But that raised even more disturbing questions. What kind of underwater facility could operate at 300-foot depths without appearing on any naval charts or intelligence reports? Who had the technology to generate electromagnetic pulses powerful enough to disable military electronics? And why was this installation apparently interested in capturing or controlling American naval vessels? The hull continued to emit stress-related sounds as we descended deeper into waters that were beyond the Hammerhead's safe operating depth. I estimated that we had perhaps 30 minutes before hull compression became critical and the submarine's structural integrity began to fail. Working frantically by flashlight, I began searching for any manual controls that might allow me to communicate with other compartments or affect the submarine's ballast systems. The navigation compartment contained manual override switches for certain critical systems, but most required electrical power to operate. However, I did find a mechanical valve that controlled emergency air release to the ballast tanks, a system designed to allow emergency surfacing even if all electrical systems had failed. The valve was stiff from disuse and required significant force to operate, but it eventually turned with a loud hissing sound as compressed air began flowing to the submarine's ballast tanks. The effect was immediate. I could feel the Hammerhead's descent rate decrease as emergency air displaced water in the ballast tanks, providing additional buoyancy. But the submarine was still being pulled horizontally through the water by whatever external force had captured us. The mechanical grinding sounds were becoming more intense, and I began to worry that the submarine's hull was sustaining damage from contact with whatever underwater structure we'd encountered. Submarine hulls are strong but not designed to withstand scraping contact with hard surfaces, and even minor damage at depth could lead to catastrophic flooding. I tried the emergency communication systems one more time, hoping that someone in another compartment might have found a way to restore partial electrical power. But the sound-powered phones remained dead, and I was still trapped alone in the navigation compartment with no way to coordinate with the rest of the crew. The dead reckoning tracker now showed that we descended to over 500 feet depth, well beyond the Hammerhead's normal operating envelope and approaching the depth where hull damage becomes inevitable. Emergency air release had slowed our descent but hadn't stopped it entirely, suggesting that whatever was pulling us down had overcome even the submarine's emergency buoyancy systems. Through the hull, I could now hear what sounded like human voices, muffled communication that suggested personnel operating equipment outside the submarine. But that was impossible unless we'd somehow been captured by another submarine or underwater vehicle, and no submarine in the world was large enough to physically manipulate a 7,800-ton Virginia-class attack boat. I was beginning to realize that the Hammerhead had encountered something that was beyond the scope of normal naval operations or known technology. Whether it was an experimental weapons system, a classified underwater installation, or something else entirely, we were dealing with capabilities that exceeded anything in my training or experience. And I was trapped alone in a powerless compartment, watching mechanical instruments that told me we were sinking toward depths that would crush the submarine's hull like an eggshell. The facility below, at 520 feet depth, the mechanical grinding against the Hammerhead's hull suddenly stopped, replaced by a sensation of smooth movement that felt like we were being guided through water rather than dragged. The change was so distinct that I could feel it through the submarine's deck plates. We'd gone from chaotic, violent motion to controlled, purposeful movement in a matter of seconds. Looking at the dead reckoning tracker, I realized we were no longer descending. Instead, the Hammerhead was moving horizontally at a steady 3 knots, following what appeared to be a precise course toward some predetermined destination. Whatever had captured us possessed not only the power to disable our electronics and overcome our ballast systems, but also the sophisticated control mechanisms necessary to pilot a 377-foot submarine with the precision of a harbor tugboat. The voices I'd been hearing through the hull were becoming clearer, though still muffled by the water and the submarine's sound dampening. They were speaking English with what sounded like American accents, using technical terminology that suggested military or industrial personnel coordinating some kind of complex operation. Maintain depth at 520 feet. Ballast compensation nominal. Estimated docking in 12 minutes. Docking. Someone was planning to dock the Hammerhead with an underwater facility that apparently existed 520 feet beneath the surface of the Pacific Ocean, well below the depth where any known installations could operate. I tried to make sense of what I was hearing and experiencing. The United States military operates several underwater facilities for research and training purposes, but none of them were located in this area of the Pacific, and none were capable of operating at depths exceeding 300 feet. The technology required to build and maintain an installation at 520 feet would represent advances in underwater engineering that were decades beyond current capabilities. But the evidence was undeniable. The electromagnetic pulse that had disabled our electronics, the precision control being exercised over our submarine's movement, and the coordinated personnel communications all pointed to a sophisticated underwater facility with capabilities that exceeded anything in the official naval inventory. The hull contact sounds changed again, now resembling the acoustic signature of docking operations, the gentle bumping and scraping of a vessel being guided into a berth. Through the submarine's hull, I could hear the operation of what sounded like massive mechanical systems. Hydraulic pumps, electric motors, and the distinctive sound of airlocks cycling. Then, impossibly, I heard something that made me question my own sanity, the sound of water being pumped out of a space large enough to contain the entire Hammerhead. The acoustic signature was unmistakable. We were inside some kind of underwater dry dock that was being drained to allow direct access to the submarine's hull. As the water level dropped around us, the Hammerhead settled onto what felt like a solid platform with a gentle bump that transmitted through the hull structure. The submarine was no longer floating. We were resting on dry land, or at least on a solid surface inside an underwater facility that had somehow been flooded and then drained to accommodate our vessel. The implications were staggering. To build an underwater dry dock capable of containing a Virginia-class submarine would require construction technology, materials science, and engineering capabilities that were supposedly impossible at depths exceeding 500 feet. The structural requirements alone would demand materials and techniques that exceeded anything in the public scientific literature. But even more disturbing was the realization that this facility had been specifically designed to capture and contain American naval vessels. The electromagnetic weapons, the precision control systems, and the submarine-sized dry dock all suggested a level of preparation and technological sophistication that could only come from a major military or industrial organization. Through the hull, I could now hear the distinctive sound of personnel moving around outside the submarine. Footsteps on metal grating, the operation of mechanical equipment, and voices coordinating what sounded like standard maritime inspection procedures. Hull integrity appears normal. No visible damage to the reactor compartment. Initiate atmospheric equalization procedures. Atmospheric equalization meant they were planning to match the air pressure inside the dry dock with the pressure inside the submarine, allowing them to cut through the hull or force open the access hatches. Once they achieved pressure equalization, the Hammerhead's hull would no longer be protecting the crew from whatever intentions these people had. I realized that I might be the only person aboard the submarine who was aware of our current situation. If the electromagnetic pulse had affected the entire vessel, the crew in other compartments might be dealing with their own equipment failures and emergency procedures without realizing that we'd been captured by an unknown underwater facility. Using the emergency equipment in the navigation compartment, I began searching for any way to restore communication with other parts of the submarine or to signal our situation to the outside world. The compartment contained several emergency transmitters designed for use if the submarine was forced to surface in hostile territory, but these devices depended on electronic components that had presumably been destroyed by the electromagnetic pulse. However, I did find a mechanical signaling device, a sound-powered communication system that used acoustic transmission through the submarine's hull structure to carry messages between compartments. This World War II-era technology didn't require electrical power and might have survived the electromagnetic attack. I began tapping out messages in Morse code on the mechanical telegraph, hoping that someone in another compartment might have similar equipment and be able to receive my transmissions. The message was brief but urgent. Navigation to all compartments. Submarine captured by unknown underwater facility. Prepare for boarding. The response came back within minutes, tapped out in the distinctive rhythm of military Morse code. Control to navigation. Captain Rodriguez injured. Electronics dead. Reactor compartment sealed. Estimated crew casualties unknown. So Captain Rodriguez was alive but injured. The reactor compartment had been sealed as an emergency precaution, and the electromagnetic pulse had affected the entire submarine. But at least I wasn't alone. Other crew members were conscious and able to communicate using the mechanical backup systems. I tapped back. Navigation TO control. We are inside underwater facility. Unknown personnel outside hull. Recommend emergency destruction procedures. Emergency destruction procedures were the submarine's last resort, a protocol for destroying classified equipment and materials if capture by hostile forces became inevitable. Every nuclear submarine carried demolition charges specifically designed to prevent sensitive technology from falling into enemy hands, but activating these charges would also ensure the death of everyone aboard. The response from the control room was immediate. Control TO navigation. Negative on destruction procedures. Attempting to determine hostile intent. Maintain current status. Captain Rodriguez, despite being injured, was still in command and making tactical decisions based on limited information. Her choice to avoid immediate destruction procedures suggested that she believed our captors might not be hostile, or that she was hoping for a peaceful resolution to our situation. But the sounds from outside the hull were becoming more ominous. I could hear what sounded like cutting equipment being positioned against the submarine's hull, high-powered tools that could breach even the hardened steel of a nuclear submarine's pressure hull. Position the thermal lance at frame 7-8. Commence cutting operations in 5 minutes. Maintain atmospheric pressure at 14.7 psi. They were going to cut through the hull using thermal lances, industrial cutting tools that could slice through submarine-grade steel like butter. Once they breached the hull, atmospheric pressure would equalize between the dry dock and the submarine's interior, and our captors would have direct access to every compartment. I had perhaps 5 minutes to find some way to resist capture, escape from the navigation compartment, or at least gather intelligence about our situation before unknown personnel gained access to the submarine's interior. Working frantically by flashlight, I began searching for any equipment that might be useful for defense or communication. The navigation compartment contained several items that weren't dependent on electronics. Manual navigation tools, emergency supplies, and backup communication equipment that used mechanical rather than electrical systems. But most importantly, I found something that might allow me to determine who had captured us and what they intended to do with the Hammerhead and her crew. The truth about Deepwatch, hidden behind a panel marked Emergency Communications Equipment, was a device I'd never seen before in 8 years of submarine service. A mechanical periscope system that could be manually extended through the submarine's hull to provide visual observation without requiring electrical power. The device was obviously non-standard equipment, marked with classification symbols that indicated it was part of some kind of special operations capability. Working quickly, I extended the periscope through its hull fitting and adjusted the manual controls to scan the area around the Hammerhead. What I saw through the eyepiece challenged everything I thought I knew about underwater technology and American military capabilities. The submarine was sitting inside a massive underwater installation that resembled a cross between a naval shipyard and a deep-sea research facility. The structure extended far beyond the limits of the periscope's field of view, with multiple levels connected by what appeared to be pressurized walkways and equipment galleries. The engineering required to build such a facility at 500-foot depth represented technological advances that were decades beyond anything I'd seen in the public sector. But what was most shocking was the personnel moving around the facility. They were wearing standard U.S. Navy uniforms with insignia I didn't recognize, operating equipment that bore American military markings, and following procedures that were obviously based on established naval protocols. These weren't foreign agents or hostile forces. They appeared to be American military personnel operating a classified underwater facility. Through the periscope, I could see a control room overlooking the dry dock where the Hammerhead was berthed. The facility bore a designation painted in large letters across the main structural beam, Deepwatch Station Bravo 7. Deepwatch wasn't a program I'd ever heard of during my naval service, but the security classifications and facility markings suggested it was a black-budget operation buried so deep in the military hierarchy that even submarine crews weren't briefed about its existence. The electromagnetic weapons, the precision submarine capture capability, and the underwater construction technology all pointed to a program with funding and authority that exceeded normal naval operations. But if Deepwatch was an American military program, why had they attacked the Hammerhead without warning and captured a U.S. Navy submarine conducting routine sea trials? And why was this facility's existence apparently classified above the security clearance levels of submarine crews? I continued scanning with the periscope, trying to gather as much intelligence as possible before the thermal cutting began. The facility appeared to contain multiple submarine berths, suggesting that the Hammerhead wasn't the first vessel to be brought here. I could see at least 2 other submarine-shaped structures in various stages of what appeared to be modification or refit operations. The personnel outside were now positioning thermal lances at specific points along the Hammerhead's hull, following procedures that suggested extensive experience with this type of operation. Whatever Deepwatch's mission was, capturing and modifying American submarines appeared to be a routine part of their activities. Through the mechanical telegraph system, I began transmitting my observations to the control room. Navigation TO control. Facility appears to be American military installation. Designation Deepwatch Station Bravo, 7. Personnel wearing U.S. Navy uniforms. Recommend attempting communication. The response came back immediately. Control to navigation. Captain Rodriguez attempting radio contact. No response to standard frequencies. Prepare for hull breach. Captain Rodriguez was trying to establish communication through normal military channels, but the facility personnel weren't responding to standard naval communication protocols. This suggested either that Deepwatch operated under different command authority than normal Navy units, or that their security procedures prohibited communication with uncleared personnel. The thermal cutting began with a brilliant flash visible through the periscope, followed by the sound of superheated metal being sliced through like paper. The cutting torches were making precise incisions at locations that corresponded to the submarine's access hatches, suggesting that Deepwatch personnel had detailed knowledge of Virginia-class submarine construction. I realized that within minutes, unknown personnel would have access to the navigation compartment and would discover my use of the classified periscope system. If Deepwatch was indeed a black-budget military program, unauthorized observation of their facility might be considered a serious security violation regardless of the circumstances that had brought us here. But I continued gathering intelligence, photographing what I could see with a manual camera from the emergency supplies and documenting the facility's layout and capabilities. Whatever was happening, the information might be crucial for understanding Deepwatch's mission and determining whether the Hammerhead and her crew were in danger. Through the periscope, I watched as facility personnel completed atmospheric equalization procedures and began opening the submarine's main access hatch. The operation was being conducted with military precision by people who obviously had extensive training in submarine operations and emergency procedures. The first person to enter the submarine was a Navy commander wearing insignia I didn't recognize, followed by what appeared to be a medical team carrying emergency equipment. Their immediate priority seemed to be providing assistance to injured crew members rather than conducting any kind of hostile interrogation or capture operation. But I also noticed that every person entering the submarine was carrying electronic devices that appeared to be specifically designed to detect and disable recording equipment. They were conducting systematic sweeps of each compartment, confiscating cameras, communication devices, and anything else that might be used to document the facility or their operations. The navigation compartment's access hatch suddenly cycled open with a mechanical grinding sound as the manual override was activated from outside. I quickly retracted the periscope and secured the emergency equipment, but there wasn't time to hide all evidence of my intelligence-gathering activities. The first person through the hatch was a Navy lieutenant commander wearing a Deepwatch insignia, a stylized submarine silhouette surrounded by what appeared to be sonar waves. He was followed by 2 technicians carrying electronic equipment that I recognized as electromagnetic pulse detection and neutralization gear. "Electronics technician Chin?" the officer asked, checking a clipboard that apparently contained the Hammerhead's crew roster. "I'm Commander Williams, Deepwatch Operations. You're not injured?" "No, sir, but I'd like to know what the hell is going on here." Commander Williams studied me for a moment before responding. "You've stumbled into a classified operation that's about 30 years above your security clearance level, Petty Officer. What I can tell you is that the Hammerhead encountered an experimental defense system that's designed to detect and neutralize potential threats to Deepwatch facilities." "Defense system? You attacked a U.S. Navy submarine conducting routine sea trials." "The electromagnetic pulse wasn't an attack. It was a precautionary measure activated when your submarine's sonar detected our installation. Deepwatch facilities are classified beyond top secret, and their existence cannot be compromised under any circumstances." Commander Williams gestured to the technicians, who began setting up equipment that appeared designed to restore power to the navigation compartment's electronic systems. "Your submarine will be repaired and returned to service with a cover story about mechanical failure requiring emergency surface operations. Your crew will be debriefed and sworn to secrecy under the National Security Act." "And if we refuse to cooperate with your cover story?" Then you'll be transferred to Deep Watch operations on a permanent basis. We have several dozen former submarine crews who've become part of our program after encountering our facilities during routine operations. The implication was clear. Personnel who discovered Deep Watch installations weren't allowed to return to normal naval service where they might compromise the program's secrecy. We could either accept the cover story and continue our careers with classified knowledge we could never discuss, or we could disappear into a black-budget program that officially didn't exist. What exactly is Deep Watch? I asked. Commander Williams looked at his technicians, who nodded to indicate that their electronic countermeasures were in place and our conversation couldn't be recorded by any surviving equipment. Deep Watch is America's insurance policy against submarine-based threats that conventional naval forces can't handle. We operate installations throughout the Pacific that are capable of detecting, capturing, and neutralizing enemy submarines using technology that's decades ahead of anything in the official military inventory. Neutralizing enemy submarines how? The same way we neutralize the Hammerhead. Electromagnetic pulse weapons that disable all electronic systems, followed by capture using precision tractor beam technology. Once a submarine is brought to a Deep Watch facility, it can be studied, modified, or destroyed depending on the threat level it represents. The technology he was describing was like something out of science fiction. Underwater installations operating at impossible depths, electromagnetic weapons powerful enough to disable nuclear submarines, and tractor beams capable of manipulating 7,800-ton vessels with precision control. How many Deep Watch facilities are there? That's classified above your clearance level, even with your new security briefing. What I can tell you is that we've been operating for over 30 years without a single security compromise, and we intend to maintain that record. Commander Williams checked his watch and made a notation on his clipboard. Your submarine's electronics will be restored within 6 hours, along with modified navigation data showing an emergency surface operation due to mechanical failure. Your crew will be briefed on the cover story and released to continue normal operations. And Captain Rodriguez? Captain Rodriguez is being treated for injuries sustained during the electromagnetic pulse event. She'll make a full recovery and will resume command of the Hammerhead with appropriate security briefings. The technicians had succeeded in restoring power to several of the navigation compartment systems, and the familiar hum of electronic equipment was returning to normal. But the displays now showed navigation data that didn't match my observations of our actual location and movements. The modified navigation records will show that your submarine experienced electrical failure at 280 feet depth and conducted emergency surface operations for repair, Commander Williams explained. Your crew's memory of events may be somewhat unclear due to the aftereffects of electromagnetic pulse exposure, but the official record will be consistent with routine mechanical failure. I realized that I was witnessing the cover-up of what might be the most significant military program in American history. A network of underwater installations using technology that could revolutionize naval warfare, operated in complete secrecy by personnel who had essentially disappeared from official military records. Commander, what happens to the crew members who don't accept the cover story? They become part of Deep Watch operations. We have excellent facilities, challenging work, and compensation that reflects the classified nature of our mission. Many personnel have found their Deep Watch assignments more rewarding than conventional naval service. But the way he said it suggested that becoming part of Deep Watch operations wasn't entirely voluntary for those who discovered the program's existence. The technicians finished their work and began packing up their equipment. Within minutes, the navigation compartment looked exactly as it had before the electromagnetic pulse, except that all the electronic systems now contained data that supported the official cover story. Petty Officer Chin, you'll be transferred back to the Hammerhead when she's released in approximately 4 hours. You'll find that your memory of today's events becomes somewhat hazy over the next few days. That's a normal aftereffect of electromagnetic pulse exposure. Are you drugging us? Nothing so crude. Electromagnetic pulse exposure at the levels you experience can cause temporary memory disruption, particularly regarding events that occurred during and immediately after the pulse. It's a documented medical phenomenon. I suspected that Deep Watch had ways of encouraging memory disruption beyond simple electromagnetic effects. But challenging Commander Williams on the subject wouldn't accomplish anything except potentially making me a candidate for permanent reassignment to their program. One more question, Commander. How many American submarines have encountered Deep Watch facilities? That's classified, but I can tell you that every encounter has been resolved successfully with no compromise of program security. The Hammerhead will be the 37th submarine to undergo this type of incident resolution. 37 American submarines had stumbled across deep-watch installations, and all 37 crews had been sworn to secrecy or permanently reassigned. The program represented a shadow naval force operating parallel to the official U.S. Navy, with capabilities and authority that exceeded anything in the public military structure. Commander Williams and his technicians left the navigation compartment, sealing the access hatch behind them. I was once again alone with electronic systems that hummed normally but contained false data designed to support a cover story that would hide one of the most significant military secrets in American history. Returned to the surface 4 hours later, the USS Hammerhead was released from Deepwatch Station Bravo 7 with her crew intact but forever changed by their encounter with America's most classified military program. The submarine's ascent to the surface was smooth and controlled, guided by facility personnel who demonstrated the same precision in releasing vessels that they'd shown in capturing them. As we broke through to the surface in the gray waters of the North Pacific, the Hammerhead's official logs showed a routine emergency surface operation following electrical failure at 280 feet depth. The navigation computers contained detailed records of our supposed location and activities that bore no resemblance to our actual experience, but which would satisfy any official investigation into our emergency surface operation. Captain Sarah Rodriguez had indeed been injured during the electromagnetic pulse event, but her injuries were consistent with the type of accident that might occur during emergency procedures aboard a submarine. She resumed command immediately upon surfacing, briefing the crew on the official version of events that would be reported to Naval Command. "All hands, this is the captain," came her voice over the submarine's intercom system. "We experienced total electrical failure at 0347 hours during deep diving operations. Emergency procedures were successfully implemented, and all systems have been restored to normal operation. We will return to Naval Base Kitsap for complete systems evaluation and repair of any damage caused by the electrical failure." The crew's reaction to this briefing was subdued and somewhat confused. I could see in their faces the same uncertainty I was feeling, memories that didn't quite match the official explanation, but which were becoming increasingly hazy as the hours passed since our encounter with Deepwatch. Lieutenant Commander Martinez, who had been officer of the deck during the electrical failure, approached me during the transit back to port. "Chin, do you remember exactly what happened down there? My memory of the whole event seems unclear." "Electromagnetic pulse exposure can cause temporary memory disruption," I repeated Commander Williams' explanation. "The important thing is that everyone survived and the submarine is operational." But Martinez looked troubled by the gaps in his memory, just as I was troubled by the knowledge that I possessed classified information about a program that officially didn't exist. The Deepwatch personnel had been correct about the psychological effects of their security procedures. Even knowing the truth about what had happened, I found myself doubting my own memories and questioning whether the official version of events might actually be accurate. The return journey to Naval Base Kitsap took 8 hours, during which the Hammerhead's crew gradually accepted the official explanation for our emergency surface operation. The submarine's electronic systems functioned normally, the navigation data supported the cover story, and there was no physical evidence of our encounter with the underwater facility. But I couldn't shake the memory of what I'd seen through that classified periscope. The massive underground installation, the advanced technology, and the dozens of personnel operating a shadow naval program with capabilities that exceeded anything in the official military inventory. Upon arrival at Naval Base Kitsap, the Hammerhead was immediately moved to a restricted maintenance facility where Deepwatch technicians, posing as routine Navy maintenance personnel, conducted detailed inspections to ensure that no evidence of our encounter remained aboard the submarine. The crew was subjected to medical examinations that were supposedly related to electromagnetic pulse exposure, but which I suspected involved additional memory modification procedures. Petty Officer Chin, Captain Rodriguez called me to her stateroom 3 days after our return to port. "I've been reviewing the incident reports from our emergency surface operation. Your performance during the electrical failure was exemplary, maintaining emergency procedures and attempting to restore communications despite total systems failure." "Thank you, Captain. I'm recommending you for advancement and transfer to Special Operations Training. There's a program that could use someone with your technical skills and ability to function under extreme stress." I realized that Captain Rodriguez was offering me a pathway into Deepwatch operations without directly acknowledging the program's existence. The choice was between continuing normal naval service with the burden of classified knowledge I could never discuss, or accepting transfer to a program where my knowledge would be useful but where I would essentially disappear from official military records. "Captain, I appreciate the recommendation, but I'd prefer to continue my current assignment aboard the Hammerhead." That may not be possible, Chin. Your security clearance has been upgraded based on your performance during the emergency, and personnel with your new clearance level are typically assigned to specialized programs. The implication was clear. My knowledge of Deep Watch made me unsuitable for normal naval operations, regardless of my personal preferences. I would either accept transfer to special operations or find my naval career terminated for unspecified security reasons. How long do I have to decide? The transfer orders will be processed within 30 days. Use that time to consider whether special operations assignment might advance your career more effectively than conventional submarine service. Over the following weeks, I found myself increasingly isolated from my former shipmates aboard the Hammerhead. Personnel with Deep Watch knowledge were apparently monitored to ensure they didn't compromise program security, and my conversations with other crew members were subtly guided away from topics related to our emergency surface operation. The memory modification procedures had been effective for most of the crew. Lieutenant Commander Martinez no longer seemed troubled by gaps in his recollection of the electrical failure, and the other crew members had accepted the official explanation without question. Only I retained clear memories of our encounter with the underwater facility, and those memories were becoming a burden that affected my ability to function in normal naval operations. 3 weeks after our return to port, I received official transfer orders to Special Operations Command, Pacific Fleet. A deliberately vague assignment that could mean anything from submarine rescue operations to classified weapons testing. The orders were signed by officials whose names didn't appear in any standard military directory, confirming that I was being transferred into Deep Watch operations. The USS Hammerhead completed her sea trials and was commissioned into full operational service with a crew that had no memory of encountering America's most classified military program. Captain Rodriguez continued her command with distinction, never again mentioning the electrical failure that had brought us into contact with technology decades ahead of anything in the official naval inventory. The official records of our emergency surface operation became part of naval maintenance databases, available to anyone with appropriate clearance but containing no information that would suggest anything beyond routine mechanical failure. The electromagnetic pulse readings, the precision submarine manipulation, and the massive underwater facility had been erased from history as completely as if they had never existed. I reported to Special Operations Command on a foggy morning in November, carrying orders that directed me to a building that wasn't marked on any base maps. The facility was staffed by personnel wearing standard Navy uniforms but bearing the distinctive Deep Watch insignia I'd seen aboard the underwater installation. Commander Williams was waiting in the reception area, carrying a clipboard that contained what appeared to be my new assignment paperwork. "Welcome to Deep Watch Operations, Petty Officer Chin. Your technical skills and security clearance make you ideal for our electronics warfare division. Do I have any choice in this assignment? Of course. You can accept transfer to Deep Watch operations with full benefits, advancement opportunities, and the knowledge that you're serving your country in ways that most military personnel will never understand. Or you can request separation from naval service with appropriate security debriefings. And if I choose separation, then you'll be free to pursue civilian employment, with the understanding that certain aspects of your naval service will remain classified for the rest of your life. Violation of those security restrictions would result in federal prosecution under the Espionage Act." I realized that I had no real choice. My knowledge of Deep Watch made me unsuitable for normal civilian employment in any field related to electronics or military technology, but it also made me valuable to a program that needed personnel who could operate advanced systems in complete secrecy. "I'll accept the transfer to Deep Watch operations." Commander Williams smiled and made a notation on his clipboard. "Excellent. You'll find that Deep Watch offers opportunities for technical advancement that aren't available anywhere else in the military. We're working with technology that won't appear in conventional naval systems for decades." My first assignment was to the Electronics Warfare Division at an underwater installation designated Deep Watch Station Alpha 3, located beneath the Pacific Ocean at coordinates that were classified above my security clearance level. The facility was even more advanced than Bravo 7, with capabilities that included electromagnetic pulse weapons, precision submarine manipulation systems, and underwater construction technology that defied conventional engineering limitations. The other personnel at Alpha 3 were all former military members who had encountered Deep Watch installations during routine operations and been transferred into the program. Submarine crews, surface vessel personnel, and even aviation units that had stumbled across facilities or operations that officially didn't exist. "How many people work for Deep Watch?" I asked Chief Petty Officer Davis, who had been assigned as my supervisor and who claimed to have been transferred from a destroyer that had encountered deep-watch operations in 1998. Several thousand across maybe 24 installations throughout the Pacific. We're not the only deep-watch operation. There are similar programs in the Atlantic and probably the Mediterranean, but operational security means we don't know details about other commands. What's our actual mission? Defending America against submarine-based threats that conventional naval forces can't handle. Foreign submarines with stealth technology, underwater weapon systems, even non-military threats like smuggling operations using advanced submersibles. Chief Davis showed me to the electronics laboratory where I would be working on development and maintenance of the electromagnetic pulse weapons that gave deep-watch installations their submarine capture capability. The technology was indeed decades ahead of anything in conventional military systems, using principles of electromagnetic field manipulation that barely existed in theoretical physics. The EMP systems can disable any electronic equipment within a 2-mile radius, Davis explained. But they can also be tuned for precision effects, disabling specific systems aboard a target submarine while leaving others functional, or creating controlled electromagnetic fields that allow us to manipulate metal objects through magnetic levitation. The precision submarine manipulation technology was based on the same electromagnetic principles, using massive field generators to create controlled magnetic fields that could lift, move, and position submarines with the precision of industrial machinery. The underwater facilities themselves were constructed using materials and techniques that wouldn't appear in civilian engineering for decades. I spent 6 months at Deepwatch Station Alpha 3, learning to operate technology that officially didn't exist and working alongside personnel who had officially disappeared from military records. The work was challenging and rewarding, but it came with the constant awareness that I had become part of a shadow military force operating outside normal command structures and accountability. Do you ever regret accepting transfer to Deepwatch? I asked Chief Davis during one of our off-duty conversations. Sometimes. I miss normal naval operations and contact with family members who don't have Deepwatch clearances. But this is probably the most important work being done anywhere in the military, and knowing that makes the sacrifices worthwhile. The sacrifices included permanent separation from family and friends who couldn't be told about Deepwatch operations, assignment to underwater installations that were isolated from normal human contact, and knowledge of technology and capabilities that could never be discussed with anyone outside the program. But there were also rewards that went beyond normal military service. Deepwatch personnel had access to technology that was decades ahead of conventional systems, worked on projects that could revolutionize naval warfare, and served in a program that provided protection against threats that most Americans would never know existed. After completing my initial assignment at Alpha 3, I was transferred to Deepwatch headquarters, a facility so classified that its location was known only to personnel with the highest security clearances. The headquarters staff coordinated operations between dozens of underwater installations, managed technology development programs, and maintained the security procedures that kept Deepwatch's existence secret. How long has Deepwatch been operating? I asked Commander Williams during my headquarters briefing. The program was established in 1987, following intelligence reports about advanced Soviet submarine technology that threatened to make conventional naval defense systems obsolete. Deepwatch was designed as America's insurance policy against submarine-based threats that couldn't be handled through normal naval operations. And it's been completely secret for over 30 years? Complete operational security has been maintained through careful personnel selection, advanced memory modification techniques, and the simple fact that Deepwatch installations operate in locations where discovery by unauthorized personnel is virtually impossible. Commander Williams showed me organizational charts that revealed the true scope of Deepwatch operations. Dozens of underwater installations throughout the Pacific, Atlantic, and Mediterranean, staffed by thousands of personnel who had been transferred from conventional military service after encountering the program. Technology development programs that were decades ahead of anything in the public sector, funded through black budget allocations that were hidden within normal military spending. What happens if Deepwatch's existence is ever discovered? That contingency has been planned for, but operational security measures make discovery extremely unlikely. Deepwatch installations are located at depths and in areas where they're invisible to conventional detection methods, and all personnel are selected for their ability to maintain security under extreme circumstances. I realized that I had become part of the most significant military secret in American history, a shadow naval force with capabilities that exceeded anything in the official military inventory, operating in complete secrecy to protect against threats that most government officials didn't know existed. My final assignment with Deepwatch was to document the program's technology and capabilities for historical records that would be sealed for 50 years after the program's eventual declassification. The work required detailed analysis of electromagnetic pulse weapons, submarine manipulation systems, underwater construction technology, and the memory modification techniques that maintained operational security. Why are you documenting this information if it's going to remain classified for decades? I asked the Deepwatch historian who supervised my work. Because someday, when the threats that Deepwatch was created to counter have been eliminated or become public knowledge, the American people will need to understand what was done to protect them and why it was necessary to operate in complete secrecy. The documentation project took 2 years and resulted in a comprehensive record of Deepwatch operations from the program's establishment through my own encounter with the USS Hammerhead. The records revealed that hundreds of American military personnel had been transferred into Deepwatch operations after discovering the program's existence, and that dozens of foreign submarines had been captured and studied using technology that remained decades ahead of conventional capabilities. Upon completion of the documentation project, I was offered a choice that few Deepwatch personnel ever received: permanent assignment to the program with advancement to senior positions, or release from service with memory modification that would allow return to civilian life. The memory modification would remove your knowledge of Deepwatch operations but leave your technical skills and military experience intact, Commander Williams explained. You could pursue a civilian career in electronics or engineering with no security restrictions and no burden of classified knowledge. And if I choose to remain with Deepwatch? You'll be promoted to Senior Chief Petty Officer and assigned to oversee technology development for next-generation electromagnetic weapons systems. The work would be challenging and rewarding, but it would require permanent assignment to Deepwatch installations with no possibility of return to conventional military or civilian life. I considered the choice for several weeks, weighing the satisfaction of working with advanced technology against the isolation and secrecy that permanent Deepwatch assignment would require. In the end, I chose memory modification and returned to civilian life, preferring the uncertainty of normal existence to the burden of permanent secrets. The memory modification process was surprisingly gentle, a combination of electromagnetic field exposure and psychological conditioning that removed specific memories while leaving general knowledge and skills intact. I retained my technical expertise and military experience, but lost all recollection of Deepwatch operations and advanced technology. I was discharged from the Navy with an honorable service record that showed routine submarine service, including several commendations for technical expertise during emergency operations. My memory of the USS Hammerhead's electrical failure was consistent with the official records, a routine mechanical problem that had been resolved through standard emergency procedures. But sometimes, during quiet moments when I'm working on civilian electronics projects, I have the strange sensation that I once knew technologies and capabilities that exceed anything in the current public sector. Phantom memories of advanced systems and underwater facilities that seem like science fiction but feel like experiences I actually lived through. I've built a successful career as a civilian electronics engineer, working on projects that push the boundaries of current technology. But I can't shake the feeling that somewhere, in facilities and operations that officially don't exist, there are people working with technology that's decades ahead of anything I'll ever see in civilian applications. The USS Hammerhead continues to serve with distinction as part of the Pacific Fleet, carrying out missions that protect American interests throughout the region. Her crew has no memory of encountering America's most classified military program, and her official service record contains no reference to the advanced technology and underwater installations that briefly touched their lives. But in the deep waters of the Pacific Ocean, Deepwatch installations continue their silent watch, ready to respond to submarine-based threats that conventional naval forces cannot handle. The program operates in complete secrecy, staffed by personnel who have chosen to disappear from official records in service of capabilities that most Americans will never know exist. The truth about Deepwatch remains buried in classified files that won't be opened for decades, protected by security measures that make discovery virtually impossible. But the technology and capabilities developed by the program continue to evolve, ensuring that America maintains underwater superiority against threats that emerge from the depths of the ocean. Someday, when the world has changed enough that Deepwatch's existence can be revealed without compromising national security, the American people will learn about the shadow naval force that protected them from threats they never knew existed. Until then, the program continues its secret mission, operating in the deep waters where conventional military forces cannot venture, using technology that officially doesn't exist to defend against dangers that few people can imagine. The ocean keeps its secrets, And Deep Watch keeps America's greatest military secret hidden beneath the waves, ready to emerge when needed to protect the nation from threats that come from the depths of the sea.